Rationing was introduced in Britain in September 1939 after the outbreak of war. One of the big reasons for rationing being introduced was that 70% of all Britain's food was imported from other countries. So if you imagine from Germany's point of view, if they can stop that 70% from getting to Britain, then Britain will be forced to surrender. And that's exactly what the big strategy was, which led to what was called the Battle of the Atlantic. The ocean between America, or the Americas, and Britain was the place where U-boats, German submarines, would attempt to destroy Allied shipping. And of course it was all aimed at cutting off Britain's supply lines and knocking it out of the war. So rationing in Britain was introduced early on in the war, September 1939. The first thing to be rationed was petrol, but that was followed. First thing to be rationed was petrol, but that was followed in January 1940 by bacon, butter, sugar. There were then successive ration schemes for meat, tea, jam, biscuits, cheese, eggs, lard, milk, canned and dried fruit. Fresh vegetables and fruit were not rationed on the whole. I mean, we mentioned that dried fruit was rationed, but fruit on the whole was not rationed. But it was not rationed for the simple fact that it wasn't being imported in quantities anywhere. Anyway, so things like bananas were very, very rare. Some children in Britain were actually surveyed in 1942, and numerous 5 to 7 year olds had become so used to the rationing that had been put in place that they didn't know that bananas existed. They didn't actually know what they were. So bananas became very rare to find. Apples were available at some times during the war, but again, it would be particular grocers who might have them, and it would be up to them how much they charged. Oranges sometimes appeared, but again, rarely, and shopkeepers would save those for children and pregnant women and distribute those appropriately. Fish was not rationed, but price did increase during the course of the war on fish. And people did used to say during World War II that the quality of fish and chips was really poor, and particularly with chips, because often the fat was of a really low quality that was used to actually cook the chips. As the war progressed, there was extended rationing on clothing as well. So obviously we're going to come on to food in a minute, but we have clothing rationing, and also certain foodstuffs that the consumer might find unusual. So, for example, whale meat was rationed, etc. Now, obviously with that, the actual food that was rationed on the whole was the things that you received came in a rationing card. So everybody was given one of these cards that you can see on the screen now, and they were given a certain amount of food, which you can also see on the screen, every week. So, for example, you would get 4 ounces of bacon or ham. You would get 8 ounces of sugar. You would get 1 ounce of cheese, or between 1 and 2 ounces of cheese. You'd get 2 ounces of butter. You might get 4 ounces of margarine. You might get some lard. That would be it for the week. And I'm actually going to put a picture on now of what that would look like for a week, just so you can get an idea. Now, you can see that picture now. You can see the milk. You can see the other foods. And what you can very quickly begin to realise is this was not a lot of food for a week. But if you imagine before World War II, the years of the Great Depression in Britain, people would be literally close to starvation in Britain. So everybody was getting a rationing card, and everybody was getting a certain amount of food. So what this actually led to was, in fact, health benefits. There were less child mortalities, there were less deaths among children. People's life expectancy was actually rising due to having a better diet. So there were some actual positive knock-on effects to the whole rationing exercise. Rationing wasn't actually stopped in Britain until 1955. It took all that time after because the war ended in 1945, obviously. So from 45 to 55, rationing actually carried on in Britain because of, I suppose, the shortages that had existed all the way up to that point.